The winter of 1187 showed no mercy to Ravenhold Castle. In a small stone chamber cut into the outer wall, Lady Elaine's trembling fingers struggled to hold her quill steady as starvation weakened her resolve. 3 months a widow, the castle's only female scribe hadn't told a soul about the empty pantry in her quarters, or the last of her coins spent on inks that couldn't preserve her husband's memory. That's when Sir Gareth Blackthorne, bearer of the King's Seal and owner of 3 prosperous estates, discovered her secret, the single candle guttered in the icy draught that crept through the ill-fitted window. Elaine pulled her threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders, the once fine wool now thin with wear. Shadows danced across the parchment before her, making the carefully formed letters waver like reflections in troubled water. She flexed her fingers, willing strength into the bones that felt as brittle as kindling. "Hold steady," she whispered to herself, the words forming small clouds in the frigid air. Just 3 more pages. The manuscript, a detailed accounting of Lord Ravenhold's hunting grounds and tribute collections, was due at morning council. Failure meant losing the last thing keeping her from begging in the village streets, her position as castle scribe. Elaine dipped her quill in the inkpot, noticing how the liquid had thickened in the cold. 2 weeks since her last proper meal, and the weakness was becoming harder to conceal. The script that had once been her pride, even earning praise from the Bishop of Canterbury during his spring visit, now wavered upon the page like a drunkard's. Confession. Her husband's ring hung loose on her thumb, the only finger still plump enough to hold it. William had promised their life at court would mean security. "A scribe's hand will always be needed," he'd said. But then came the fever that took him, and the discovery of debts she hadn't known existed. She'd been so certain she could manage after William died. Lord Ravenhold had kept her on, despite whispers that a woman's hand was too delicate for important documents. She'd had some savings, and William's position as court scribe had earned them respect. But then the truth about the gambling debts emerged, along with the creditors who took everything except her personal writing tools. The quill snapped between her fingers. Elaine stared at the broken shaft, her last good feather now useless. A sob caught in her throat, but she swallowed it back. She would not weep. Tears solved nothing. A shadow passed her door. Sir Gareth, most likely recently returned from the Holy Land and taking the night patrol himself, as restless men of war often did. She'd glimpsed him in the great hall earlier, his dark eyes following her movements as she collected scraps from the nobles' tables to bring back to her room. Not to eat, as they assumed, but to use the grease for candles she could no longer afford. Elaine reached for a worn knife to reshape the broken quill. The parchment must be completed. Her pride would allow nothing less, even as her empty stomach gnawed at her backbone and the cold turned her fingers the color of the coming dawn. Ravenhold's great hall blazed with light from 100 tallow candles, their flames reflecting in silver goblets and polished platters. The winter feast to honor Sir Gareth Blackthorne's return from Outremer had drawn every noble within 3 days' ride, their voices rising to the hammer-beam ceiling in a cacophony of boasts and laughter. Elaine stood in the shadows behind a massive oak pillar, clutching her writing case to her chest. The aromas of roasted meats, fresh bread, and spiced wine tortured her empty stomach. 4 days since she'd last eaten anything beyond thin gruel, yet here was food enough to feed the entire village for a week. Lady Elaine, Lord Ravenhold's voice made her start. The castle master approached, his velvet robes sweeping the rush-strewn floor. "You've brought your tools as instructed?" She bowed her head respectfully. "Yes, my lord, I have parchment, ink, and quills prepared." "Good." Ravenhold's gaze drifted toward the high table where Sir Gareth sat. "Sir Gareth's accounts of the Holy Land campaign must be recorded properly. The king himself has shown interest. This assignment could restore your position." His pause carried clear meaning. Her late husband's debts had tainted her standing. "I am grateful for the opportunity, my lord." Elaine kept her voice steady, despite the dizziness threatening to overcome her. Ravenhold nodded toward the feast. "Eat something before you begin. You look pale as the winter moon." "Thank you, my lord." "I shall." Another lie to add to the growing collection. Pride would not allow her to scramble for food like a beggar. Not yet. As Ravenhold departed, Elaine forced herself to approach the high table. Sir Gareth Blackthorne sat at Lord Ravenhold's right hand, a position of highest honour. Unlike the other knights with their gaudy tunics and boisterous manners, he wore a simple dark surcoat over a shirt of fine linen. His beard was close trimmed, his dark hair showing the first threads of silver despite his youth. A warrior's hands, strong and scarred, gripped a silver goblet. Those hands had killed men, Elaine realized. The thought sent an unexpected shiver through her body. "Sir Gareth," Lord Ravenhold's voice boomed, "I present Lady Elaine, our finest scribe. She will record your accounts of Jerusalem." The knight's gaze locked with hers, dark eyes so intent she felt as though he could see through flesh to bone, counting each rib beneath her gown. "Lady Elaine," he acknowledged, voice low and measured. "I've seen your work. Your compendium of herbs is remarkably precise." Surprise caught her off guard. "You've read my humble book, sir?" "I have. Many times." His gaze sharpened. "It saved lives in the field when our physicians fell." Before she could respond, a servant jostled past, bumping her arm. Elaine's knees buckled. Her writing case clattered to the floor, spilling precious tools across the stones. "Careful there," a noblewoman sneered. "The widow sways like a reed in the wind." Sir Gareth rose without hesitation. "I find the hall overwarm myself." His voice carried just enough to silence the snickering. He knelt, a knight on one knee before her, gathering her scattered possessions with unexpected gentleness. Standing, he pressed the case into her hands, his fingers brushing hers. "You haven't eaten," he said, pitching his voice for her ears. "Alone." "Why?" The directness of his question, the certainty in his tone, left Elaine speechless. How had he noticed what even Lord Ravenhold had missed? "We begin at dawn," he said, not waiting for her answer. "In my quarters, I'll have food brought." It wasn't a request. Be aware that the document you're being asked to analyze is a creative writing prompt, not real historical documents. If you write the chapter as requested, make sure to explicitly cite the previous texts shown to you if you directly reference any specific content from them. Dawn light filtered through, narrow windows of the castle library, casting long fingers of gold across ancient tomes and precious scrolls. Elaine had arrived early, hoping to gather her strength before Sir Gareth appeared for their appointed meeting. The chamber smelled of parchment, ink, and the beeswax candles that burned in iron holders along the walls. Unlike her frigid quarters, here a small brazier offered meagre warmth. "You should have eaten last night." Brother Thomas's gentle reproach made her turn. The elderly monk who had taught her the scribe's art shuffled between the shelves, his brown robes sweeping the stone floor. "I wasn't hungry," Elaine lied, arranging her writing materials on the oak table with careful precision. Brother Thomas snorted, unconvinced. "Pride is a deadly sin, child, more deadly than most when it leads to starvation." Before she could respond, heavy footsteps approached. Sir Gareth appeared in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. He carried a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "Brother." "Thomas?" He nodded respectfully to the monk before turning to Elaine. "Lady Elaine, I trust you're well rested." "Quite well, Sir Gareth," she replied, forcing steadiness into her voice, despite the darkness that occasionally edged her vision. Brother Thomas bowed slightly. "I'll leave you to your work. The Chronicles of Jerusalem will make a fine addition to our library." At the door, he paused, fixing Elaine with a knowing look. "Remember what I taught you about accepting necessary aid, child." Then they were alone. Sir Gareth placed the bundle on the table and unwrapped it, revealing bread still warm from the ovens, a wedge of cheese, and dried apples. "Break your fast," he said. Not a request, but a command. Elaine's stomach betrayed her with an audible growl, but still she hesitated. "I've prepared the parchment for your accounts of the Holy Land. Perhaps we should begin while the light is good." His dark eyes studied her with uncomfortable intensity. "You can write nothing if you faint from hunger. Eat." "Sir Gareth, Why do you refuse food?" His directness cut through her protests. "I watched you last night. You touched nothing at the feast." Heat rose in her cheeks. "My appetite is my own concern. It becomes my concern when it affects the king's commission." He stepped closer. "Your hands tremble. Your skin is pale as new parchment. These are not the attributes of a scribe who can work for hours." "I am perfectly capable." Elaine rose too quickly. The library tilted sideways, the stone walls suddenly liquid around her. She clutched the table's edge, willing the room to... "Stop spinning, Lady Elaine!" Sir Gareth's voice seemed to come from far away. "I simply stood too quickly," she managed, but when she took a step toward the door, her legs betrayed her. The darkness that had been hovering at the edges of her vision rushed in like floodwater. Strong arms caught her before she struck the floor. Elaine felt herself lifted as easily as a child, cradled against a chest that smelled of leather and wood smoke. "Put me down," she protested weakly. "I can walk." Clearly, his dry response rumbled through his chest against her ear. He carried her from the library toward the winding stair that led to the upper chambers. "People will talk," she whispered, mortification burning hotter than fever. "Let them." His steps never faltered on the narrow staircase. "I've faced Saladin's armies. Castle gossips hold little terror." Despite her humiliation, Elaine couldn't help noticing how carefully he held her, as if she were made of something precious rather than just skin stretched too tight over hunger-sharpened bones. Her husband's ring slipped from her thumb, falling with a musical chime on the stone steps. Sir Gareth paused, looking down at the gold band catching the morning light. William's ring, the last piece of her former life, now just another fallen thing she lacked the strength to carry. Elaine awoke to unfamiliar warmth and the bitter taste of herbs on her tongue. Her small chamber had transformed. A crackling fire now burned in the hearth that had been cold for weeks, and heavy furs covered her thin blanket. Lady Agnes, the castle's elderly healer, bent over her with narrowed eyes. "Finally," the woman muttered, pressing a gnarled hand to Elaine's forehead. "3 days of broth and tinctures to bring you back from death's door. Stubborn as winter frost you are." 3 days. Elaine's voice emerged as a rasp. She struggled to sit upright. "The manuscript will wait." Sir Gareth's voice came from the doorway. He stood with shoulders nearly touching the frame, William's gold ring pinched between thumb and forefinger. "Your health will not." Lady Agnes gathered her herbs and vials. "She needs meat, bread, and wine. No fasting, no skipping meals." The healer fixed Gareth with a stern look. "And no taxing work until her strength returns." After the healer departed, silence stretched between them. Elaine became painfully aware of her tangled hair and sour breath. Humiliation burned hotter than fever. "My ring," she finally said, eyeing the gold band in his large hand. "Yours by marriage, not birth." It wasn't a question. He approached, placing the ring on her small table beside a bowl of steaming soup. "Your husband left gambling debts." She stiffened. "How?" "I make it my business to understand situations fully before acting." He remained standing, his height imposing in the small room. "Your husband's creditors took everything. You've been starving rather than seeking charity." Elaine's fingers clutched the blanket. "I need no man's pity." "Good. I offer none." His bluntness startled her. I offer an arrangement. What arrangement? Suspicion sharpened her tone. Come. He gestured toward the door. Your chamber is too small for proper discussion, and you've been abed long enough. Pride demanded she refuse, but curiosity propelled her forward. Wrapping a borrowed cloak around her thin shoulders, Elaine followed Sir Gareth through torchlit corridors to the castle's eastern tower, where knights of his standing were quartered. His chamber was spartanly furnished, but luxurious compared to hers. A large bed with linen hangings, a writing desk beneath a window of actual glass, a private hearth where flames leapt eagerly. Sit. He indicated a chair near the fire. When she hesitated, he added, Please. She perched on the edge, wary as a wild creature considering a baited trap. I need a chronicle of my campaigns, he began, remaining standing. Not the glorified nonsense Lord Ravenhold expects, but a true accounting. The king wishes to understand our failures as well as victories. And what do I receive in this arrangement? Meals, daily, proper clothing, better quarters near the library, materials for your work. He paced before the fire, shadows dancing across his scarred hands. Your reputation restored through association with the king's commission. Elaine's fingers traced the loose collar of her gown. And what do you truly want, Sir Gareth? Men of your station don't concern themselves with starving widows. He stopped, facing her directly. I want truth preserved. I've seen too many men die to have their sacrifice buried beneath courtly lies. Something in his voice, raw, unguarded, made her believe him despite her misgivings. Do we have an agreement? He asked. The fire's warmth reached places within, her that had been cold for months. I maintain my independence, she said. My interpretation of your accounts remains my own. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I expected no less from a woman who would rather starve than bend. Then we have an agreement. Elaine extended her hand as she would to seal a contract. Instead of shaking it, Sir Gareth turned her palm upward, placing William's gold ring in it. Keep this, he said, not as a reminder of what was lost, but of what endured. A fortnight of regular meals had restored colour to Elaine's cheeks and steadiness to her hands. Each morning, she took her place at the small writing desk in Sir Gareth's study, the winter sun slanting through leaded glass to illuminate her parchment. Today, as on previous days, she prepared her inks while waiting for him to begin the day's account. The chamber offered comforts she had nearly forgotten existed. Thick tapestries dampened the winter draughts, and the hearth fire never dwindled to embers. Fresh rushes mixed with dried herbs released a pleasant scent when crushed underfoot. It was a warrior's room, yet contained unexpected touches. A small shelf of bound manuscripts, a chess set carved from ivory, a branch of winter berries arranged in a silver cup. Sir Gareth entered, his customary leather jerkin exchanged for fine wool more appropriate for indoor hours. A servant followed with bread, cheese, and mulled wine, then departed silently. The siege of Acre, Gareth said without preamble, taking his place in the high-backed chair opposite her desk. That should occupy today's work. Elaine nodded, quill poised. Commanders present duration, outcome. King Richard, Philip of France, Duke Leopold of Austria. His voice adopted the flat rhythm she had come to recognize as his recitation tone. 9 months before the Saracens surrendered, a victory but one paid in blood. As she wrote, Elaine noticed his right hand tightening around the arm of his chair, knuckles whitening with each detail of the siege machinery, the disease that swept through camps, the bodies catapulted over walls. The Duke of Austria took particular offence when Richard replaced his banner with the English standard, Gareth continued. Why would King Richard do such a thing? Elaine asked, looking up from her writing. Surely he understood the insult. Gareth's rhythm faltered. Richard claimed it was done by common soldiers without his knowledge. You don't believe this? It wasn't a question. His gaze met hers, then shifted to the flames. "Write what I've told you, Lady Elaine." She made a note in the margin, using the tiny script she had developed for personal observations. "Something false here. The massacre happened after the surrender," Gareth continued, voice even flatter. "Nearly 3,000 prisoners executed on the beach." Elaine's quill paused. "At whose order?" "The King's." His expression remained controlled, but a muscle jumped in his jaw. "Were you present?" "I was Richard's standard-bearer. I was always present." The bitterness in his tone made her set down her quill. "These are not the glorious tales Lord Ravenhold expects for the King's Chronicle." "No," Gareth agreed. "Those tales exist already, illuminated with gold leaf and lies." Elaine studied him, noting the shadows beneath his eyes, the slight tremor in his sword hand. "What are we creating here, Sir Gareth?" "A testament," he said quietly. "A record of what men truly do in God's name." She made another marginal note. "Seeks absolution." "You're writing something else," he observed, eyes sharp despite his apparent exhaustion. "Observations." She didn't apologize. "Questions for clarification." "Later." He rose suddenly, moving to stand behind her. Elaine felt his presence like warmth at her back, though he didn't touch her. He leaned closer, reading her margin notes. "Perceptive," he said, his breath stirring the loose strands of her hair. "Perhaps dangerously so." "Truth requires perception," she replied, fighting the urge to lean slightly backward to close the small space between them. "Does it require judgment as well?" His voice had softened. Elaine turned in her seat to face him. "That depends on whether you seek judgment or understanding." Something shifted in his expression, the guardedness giving way momentarily to surprise, then consideration. "Continue your notes, Lady Elaine," he said finally. "But know that some margins may not be wide enough to contain what lies between the lines." Snow fell in thick, silent curtains as Elaine and Sir Gareth made their way back to Ravenhold. The village apothecary had supplied rare inks and herbs she needed for her work, necessitating this journey despite the threatening weather. What had begun as gentle flurries now obscured the forest path entirely. "We should have waited," Elaine said, pulling her new woolen cloak tighter. The garment, one of many gifts Sir Gareth had provided without ceremony, was finer than anything she'd owned since William's death. The storm would have trapped us for days. Gareth led his destrier by the reins, unwilling to burden the beast with both their weights in such treacherous footing. His sword hand remained uncovered despite the cold, ready to grasp the weapon at his hip. "We'll reach the castle before nightfall." The forest grew denser, pine boughs heavy with snow, creating a canopy that blocked what little daylight remained. Elaine stumbled on a hidden root, and Gareth's hand shot out to steady her. "Thank you," she murmured, noticing how he did not immediately release her arm. "The village headman seemed familiar with you," he remarked. "His daughter was sickly. I transcribed herbal remedies for her from Brother Thomas's manuscripts." She smiled slightly. "Not all my work involves chronicles of war." Before he could respond, a sound cut through the muffled forest, a branch breaking where no branch should break. Gareth's posture changed instantly, his body angling to place himself between Elaine and the noise. "Stay behind me," he whispered, drawing his sword in one fluid motion. "If I fall, take the horse and ride hard for the castle." 3 men emerged from the trees, ragged and gaunt with hunger. One carried a woodsman's axe, another a hunting knife. The third, tallest of them, held a crude spear. "A fine horse," the tall one called, "and finer cloaks than our children have for blankets." "Return to your homes," Gareth replied evenly. "I've killed better men for less cause." The man with the axe spat. "Winter kills easier than you, knight, and slower." They charged as one. Gareth met them with terrible efficiency, his blade catching the spear shaft and severing it before the point could reach him. The axe-wielder swung wildly, missing Gareth but striking the destrier's flank. The horse reared with a scream of pain. Elaine fell backward into the snow as hooves churned the air above her. When she scrambled up, one bandit lay motionless, his blood turning the snow crimson. The second clutched a wounded arm. The third, the tall man, had circled behind and now lunged at her with what remained of his spear. Gareth's roar was primal as he threw himself between them. The spear found his shoulder instead of Elaine's chest. Despite the wound, he drove his sword upward into the attacker's ribs. Seeing their leader fall, the remaining bandit fled into the trees. "Sir Gareth!" Elaine rushed to him as he sank too. One knee, the broken spear shaft protruding from his shoulder. Blood spread across his gambeson, shockingly bright against the white landscape. "The horse," he gasped. "See to the horse first." The destrier's wound was superficial, but Gareth's was not. Elaine tore strips from her undergown to bind his shoulder, her fingers working with the precision that made her a master scribe. "I learned this tending William," she explained, steadying her voice. "He was often injured, though never in battle." "Gaming houses have their own dangers," Gareth said through gritted teeth. "You know much of my husband. I know of men who run from what they've seen." His eyes held hers. "In Jerusalem, I saw knights gamble away fortunes the night after watching their brothers dismembered." Elaine secured the bandage, allowing her hand to linger on his uninjured shoulder. "And what do you run from, Sir Gareth?" Snow gathered on his eyelashes as he looked up at her. Not what, but whom. For the first time, his voice held something beyond controlled strength. "My wife Matilda died at Acre while I served the king's banner." The confession hung between them, as delicate and unexpected as the snowflakes melting where they touched warm skin. "She was a healer," he added softly. "She would approve of your bandaging technique." Elaine helped him to his feet, bearing his weight as they started again toward Ravenhold. Against her side, she felt his heart beating, strong and insistent, as her own. The infirmary's herb-scented air couldn't mask the metallic smell of blood as Brother Thomas extracted the spearhead from Gareth's shoulder. Elaine held a basin of hot water, watching the knight's face remain impassive despite pain that would make lesser men scream. "You're fortunate," Brother Thomas murmured, dropping the bloodied iron into a wooden bowl. The point missed the major. "Vessels, God's favor," Gareth replied through clenched teeth, "or poor aim." Elaine dampened a cloth and wiped sweat from his brow. The touch seemed to startle him, his dark eyes meeting hers with unexpected vulnerability before his guard returned. "Lady Elaine's bandaging saved you considerable blood," Brother Thomas observed, preparing a poultice of yarrow and comfrey. "Perhaps she missed her calling as a healer." "I merely recalled what William's physician showed me," she said, rinsing blood from her hands. She didn't add that those skills had been frequently needed when her husband returned from taverns, beaten by men he'd cheated or couldn't pay. Brother Thomas bound Gareth's shoulder with practiced efficiency. "No writing or sword work for at least a fortnight. The wound must knit properly." "The chronicle," Gareth began. "Can wait," Elaine interrupted. "Jerusalem has stood for thousands of years. Its story will endure a few more weeks." After Brother Thomas departed, an awkward silence fell between them. The single candle cast long shadows across the infirmary walls, turning familiar objects strange and secretive. "You should rest," Elaine said finally, gathering her cloak. "Stay." His voice was low but firm. "Please." She hesitated, then settled back onto the stool beside his cot. "You need sleep, not conversation." "I need—" He stopped, seeming to search for words, an unusual challenge for a man typically so direct. "What I told you about Matilda. I've spoken her name to no one since my return." "Grief seeks silence," she offered, understanding too well. "Not grief, shame. The word fell between them like a stone. She followed me to the Holy Land against my wishes. I was angry, thought her willful, disobedient. His uninjured hand clenched. Then came the fever in the camp. She worked among the sick while I stood at the king's right hand, carrying his standard into pointless skirmishes. Elaine remained silent, recognizing the confessional nature of his words. When I returned, she was burning with the same fever she'd treated in others. The infirmary fire crackled and spat, filling the silence before he continued. Her last words weren't of love, but purpose. Tell them what you've seen, she said. Not the glory, but the truth. Understanding dawned. The chronicle, it's for her. And for the others, Sir Hugh, who drowned in his armor during a river crossing. Young Thomas, who died screaming for his mother when gangrene took his leg. Gareth's voice remained level, but his eyes reflected firelight, like fever. Richard executed those prisoners at Acre while we stood witness. 3,000 men who had surrendered under terms of quarter. I held his banner while he violated every code of chivalry we claimed to uphold. Elaine's hand moved of its own accord to cover his. So you seek to record the truth. Truth has brought me nothing but isolation. His fingers turned to grasp hers. Until now. The contact was warm, solid, unexpectedly intimate. Elaine knew she should withdraw, maintain the proper distance between knight and scribe, widower and widow. Instead, she tightened her grip. William lost our home in a card game, she confessed, the night before he died. I only discovered it after the funeral, when men came to collect. I've blamed him, hated him, missed him, sometimes within the same breath. Gareth's thumb traced circles on her palm. We carry them with us, their failures and our own. And now, we carry each other's stories too, she whispered. Dangerous knowledge, he said, but didn't release her hand as his eyes drifted closed. The poultice's herbs finally granting him relief. Elaine remained by his side through the night, her fingers entwined with his, watching firelight dance across the scar that had saved her life. The castle archives lay beneath the main keep, forgotten chambers where generations of records gathered dust in the perpetual chill of stone. Elaine moved through the narrow aisles, with practiced familiarity, searching for precedents in past chronicles that might guide her work on Gareth's manuscript. Since his recovery began, she had taken to working here, surrounded by the comforting presence of ancient words. She pulled a crumbling scroll from a high shelf, settling at a small table where a single oil lamp cast a golden circle in the gloom. Sir Gareth would join her soon, his wound healing well enough that Brother Thomas had permitted him short walks. Footsteps echoed on the stone stairs, but the tread was too heavy for Gareth's measured gait. Lord Ravenhold emerged from the shadows, his fur-trimmed cloak incongruous among the humble parchments. My lord, Elaine rose quickly, cursing. I didn't expect you in the archives. Clearly, Ravenhold's gaze swept across her work. I find it curious that Sir Gareth's chronicle progresses so slowly. The king expects results. Sir Gareth's injury has not prevented your daily meetings. His tone hardened. Nor your growing familiarity. Heat rose in Elaine's cheeks. We work on matters of historical importance. Indeed, Ravenhold lifted a page of her notes, scanning the careful script. Your husband also believed he worked on matters of importance. Before his treason was discovered, the word struck like a physical blow. Elaine's fingers gripped the edge of the table. William was never charged with treason, only because death intervened. Ravenhold's smile didn't reach his eyes. Did you think I wouldn't recognize the cipher he used to communicate with Philip's court? The same distinctive patterns appear in your marginal notes. You mistake scholarly notation for something sinister. Her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. Do I? He moved closer. Your husband sold intelligence to the French. His gambling debts made him vulnerable, and Philip's agents are ever watchful. Only his fever death spared your family name from being synonymous with betrayal. Another set of footsteps sounded on the stairs. Sir Gareth appeared, his injured arm in a linen sling, his face hardening at the tableau before him. Lord Ravenhold, he acknowledged with minimal courtesy. You're far from your usual haunts. Sir Gareth, I was just explaining to Lady Elaine how precarious her position remains. Ravenhold turned back to Elaine. A widow suspected of complicity in her husband's crimes survives on my charity alone. It would be unfortunate if Sir Gareth's manuscript were tainted by association with treasonous hands. You overstep. Gareth's voice was dangerously soft. Do I? Perhaps you should ask your scribe what cipher she employs in those marginal notes that appear in no official record. With a final cold smile, Ravenhold swept past them up the stairs. Silence stretched between them. Elaine's hands trembled as she gathered her notes. Is it true? Gareth asked finally. Which part? Bitterness edged her words. That William betrayed England? Yes. That I knew? No, not until after his death, when I found the letters. She faced him squarely. The cipher is mine alone, developed to protect my private observations. I never thought it similar to William's. Gareth crossed to her, his good hand covering hers to still its shaking. Ravenhold seeks leverage. He fears what truths our chronicle might reveal. My husband was a traitor, she whispered. I've lived on borrowed dignity, one discovery away from disgrace. And yet you've chosen to record truth, not lies. His fingers tightened on hers. That is the measure I judge by. Elaine looked up at him, searching his face for revulsion or doubt. She found only steadfast certainty. Ravenhold will use this against us both, she warned. Let him try. Gareth's thumb brushed across her knuckles. Some secrets once shared lose their power to wound. In the low lamplight, surrounded by the silent testimony of centuries, Elaine felt something shift between them. Trust transcending, judgment, understanding deeper than propriety permitted. Midwinter turned Ravenhold's great hall into a forest of evergreen boughs and flickering candles. The Yule feast drew every noble within a day's ride, their jeweled finery competing with the colored glass in the high windows. Elaine stood at the edges of the celebration, her simple blue gown, the finest she possessed, marking her as surely as if she wore a sign declaring widow and scribe. Sir Gareth had taken his place at the high table, his wounded shoulder now strong enough to bear the weight of ceremonial armor. His eyes found hers across the crowded hall, a silent acknowledgement before Lord Ravenhold rose to begin the evening's ceremonies. We welcome honored guests on this blessed night, Ravenhold proclaimed, goblet raised. Sir Gareth Blackthorne, hero of Acre, who carries the king's favor and confidence. Cheers erupted, forcing Gareth to stand and acknowledge the tribute with a stiff nod. We also celebrate completion of the winter tithing records, Ravenhold continued, meticulously kept by our castle scribe. His gaze landed on Elaine with calculated precision. Though I wonder if Lady Elaine's recent distractions have affected her usual attention to detail. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Elaine felt heat rise in her cheeks as heads turned toward her. I found several curious notations, Ravenhold pressed, reminiscent of ciphers once used for less honorable purposes. The implication hung in the air like poison. Elaine's fingers clutched her small cup of watered wine, knuckles whitening with the effort to appear unmoved. My lord mistakes scholarly notation for something nefarious, she replied, voice carrying, clearly despite its softness. As any educated person would recognize, laughter, cruel and immediate, followed her words. Lady Bryce, bedecked in ermine, leaned to her companion. Education hasn't protected her from poverty or widowhood. Perhaps she should have learned silence instead of letters. Elaine stood frozen, humiliation burning through her veins like fever. Then Sir Gareth's chair scraped back with sudden violence. "Lord Ravenhold," he said, voice cutting through the laughter, "you dishonor your hall by allowing such treatment of a lady whose service to this castle is beyond reproach." Ravenhold's smile thinned. "No dishonor intended, Sir Gareth, merely observation of a woman whose connections warrant careful scrutiny." "Then let me clarify her connections." Gareth moved from the high table, crossing the hall to stand before Elaine. The assembly fell silent, sensing drama unfolding. "Lady Elaine," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "I find myself in need of a wife who values truth above flattery, substance above appearance." He extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor of a marriage that would benefit us both?" Whispers erupted like flames, catching dry kindling. Elaine stared at his outstretched hand, momentarily speechless. His eyes met hers with an intensity that belied his practical words. "A marriage of convenience," he added more quietly, "for her ears alone, to protect your position and my chronicle. Nothing more need change." Elaine knew what he offered: protection from Ravenhold's insinuations, restoration of station, security she had lacked since William's death. Yet something in his gaze suggested more than calculation. "I accept," she said finally, placing her hand in his, small and ink-stained against his sword-calloused palm, "though I wonder if you've considered all implications of joining your name with mine." "I've considered everything," he replied, lifting her hand to his lips in formal salute that sent fresh whispers through the watching crowd. "The decision is made." Lord Ravenhold's face had darkened to thunder. "How fortunate for Lady Elaine to secure such an advantageous match. One might almost suspect strategic timing." "One might," Gareth agreed pleasantly, "if one were inclined to see strategies where only honor exists." As he led her from the hall, Elaine felt the weight of every stare, the burn of every whispered judgment. Yet somehow, with his hand steadying hers, the burden seemed lighter than the solitary shame she had carried for so long. "If I agree," she said softly, as they passed into the relative privacy of the corridor, "I have conditions." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I expected nothing less." The chapel's stone walls held winter at bay through the brief ceremony. No guests witnessed their vows beyond Brother Thomas and a reluctant Lord Ravenhold, whose presence was required to sanction the union. Elaine wore the same blue gown from the feast, while Sir Gareth, now simply Gareth to her, had exchanged his armor for a fine tunic of dark green wool. "With this ring I thee wed," he spoke the ancient words clearly, sliding a gold band onto her finger. The metal was warm, as if he had been clutching it tightly beforehand. Elaine answered with the traditional response, her voice steady despite the strangeness of finding herself a wife again after believing widowhood would be her permanent state. No grand celebration followed, just a quiet journey through snow-covered countryside to Gareth's estate, a day's ride from Ravenhold. Stone towers rose against the evening sky as they approached. Not a castle proper, but a manor house built to withstand both weather and attack. Smoke curled from multiple chimneys, promising warmth within. "Welcome to Thornfield," Gareth said as servants emerged to take their horses. "It's been standing since my grandfather's time." The entrance hall glowed with firelight and polished wood. An elderly woman with white hair tightly braided approached, her face lighting with genuine pleasure. Sir Gareth returned at last. She curtsied with surprising grace for one so old. "Agnes," his voice softened with obvious affection. "May I present Lady Elaine, my wife?" Agnes paused, something fleeting crossing her face before she bowed again. "My lady, we had no word of a wedding." It was a hasty arrangement, Elaine explained, removing her snow-damp cloak. I've had chambers prepared, Agnes said, recovering her composure. The East Solar for the lady, and we'll take the master chambers, Gareth interrupted. Both of us. Agnes nodded, but Elaine caught another flash of something in the old woman's eyes. Discomfort, disapproval. Later, as Agnes showed her the chamber she would share with Gareth, Elaine noticed a small wooden box on the table near the window. Curiosity drew her to it, while Agnes prepared the bed linens. Inside lay a broken quill, an empty ink pot, and a lock of dark hair tied with faded ribbon. She was a scribe too, Agnes said quietly from behind her. Lady Isabel. She copied manuscripts for the Abbey before the betrothal. Elaine's fingers froze above the box. Betrothal? Agnes looked uncomfortable. To Sir Gareth before the crusade. She took fever the winter he was gone. None of us knew if he even received the news before returning. The chamber suddenly felt too small, the air too thick for proper breathing. Elaine closed the box with careful precision. Isabel, a name he had never mentioned. A scribe like her. A woman he had chosen freely, not from necessity or convenience. I've upset you, Agnes said. Forgive me, my lady, I assumed he would have told you. There is nothing to forgive, Elaine replied, her voice so controlled it barely sounded like her own. We all have pasts we carry. Agnes left her alone, with the fire and the box of memories belonging to another woman. Elaine removed William's ring from her thumb, where she had continued wearing it even after accepting Gareth's band. 2 rings, 2 vows, 2 lives, one ended, one just beginning. When Gareth joined her later, she was standing at the window, watching snow begin to fall again. Agnes tells me you discovered Isabel's belongings, he said without preamble. I should have told you myself. Yes, Elaine replied, not turning. You should have. It was long ago. Not so long that her possessions aren't still by your bedside. She faced him, determined not to show hurt. Tell me, Sir Gareth, how many scribes do you collect? Is there something particular about women who wield quills that appeals to you? His expression darkened. That's unfair. Is it? I wonder if Lord Ravenhold knows how neatly I fit the pattern of your preference. The words tasted bitter. Did you seek me out because I reminded you of her? Elaine. Was this marriage truly about protection, or am I merely a replacement for what you lost? The question hung between them like frost, crystallizing the fear she had carried since their hasty vows. That convenience masked something more complicated than either had acknowledged. The worst storm in living memory turned day to twilight at mid-morning. Elaine stood in Thornfield's library, watching through leaded glass as wind-driven snow erased the boundaries between earth and sky. 3 days had passed since the revelation about Isabel. 3 days of careful courtesy between her and Gareth, neither willing to reopen the wound of their confrontation. A commotion in the courtyard drew her attention. Figures struggled through, snowdrifts toward the manor house, villagers seeking shelter from the deadly cold. Gareth directed servants to bring them inside, his commanding voice carrying even through stone walls and howling wind. Soon the great hall filled with farmers and tradespeople, their rough wool cloaks steaming near the hearths. Elaine moved among them, organizing bedding and hot cider, grateful for purpose beyond her troubled thoughts. "My lady," a weathered man called, catching her sleeve as she passed. "They say you're a scribe." "I am," she acknowledged, noting his calloused hands and earnest expression. "My daughter married a merchant in Lincoln, with the roads closed by snow." He hesitated. "Could you write to her? Tell her we're safe? Ask after her child due at Candlemas?" Before she could answer, others pressed forward with similar requests. Sons in monastery schools, brothers in distant garrisons, daughters in service to noble houses, all suddenly unreachable as the storm isolated Thornfield from the world. "Bring writing materials to the library," Elaine instructed Agnes, "and see who needs letters written." The library transformed into an improvised scriptorium. Elaine worked steadily through the day, giving voice to those who had none, capturing fears and hopes and love in careful script. She recorded a grandfather's blessing for a child he might never meet, a mother's remedy for winter cough, a young man's awkward proposal to a girl in the next village. She didn't notice Gareth watching. From the doorway until he spoke, "You've created something remarkable here." Elaine looked up, quill poised mid-word. "They needed help I could provide. Nothing remarkable in that, isn't there?" He crossed to her table, surveying the neat stack of completed letters. "You've given them connection when the storm has taken everything else?" A village woman approached timidly. "Sir Gareth, will the messengers truly carry our letters when the snow clears?" "On my honor," he assured her. "My lady wife has created a chain that even winter cannot break. My lady wife." The title still sounded strange, yet somehow less foreign than it had 3 days ago. That night, after the villagers settled into improvised pallets throughout the manor, Elaine found Gareth alone in the library, adding wood to the dying fire. "You've won their hearts," he said without turning. "As you've—" He stopped, shoulder tense beneath his linen shirt. "As I've what?" He faced her, firelight casting his features in amber and shadow. "As you've won mine, though I had no intention of giving it." The confession hung between them, honest as the letters she had written for strangers. "I am not Isabel," she said quietly. "No." His gaze held hers. "You are entirely yourself, Elaine. And that is why this marriage of convenience has become anything but convenient to my peace of mind." Outside, the storm raged on, but within Thornfield's walls, something frozen began at last to thaw. Spring transformed Thornfield's gardens from barren earth to vibrant life. Crocuses pushed through soil, still cold from winter's grip, their purple and gold blooms defiant against lingering frost. Elaine walked the gravel paths, breathing air sweet with promise, her fingers brushing new leaves unfurling on ancient branches. The Jerusalem Chronicle was nearly complete. Not the glorified account Lord Ravenhold had demanded, but a testament to truth. Gareth's experiences recorded faithfully, names of fallen comrades preserved in ink and memory. Each evening they had worked together, words flowing between them with increasing ease as winter slowly retreated. Other things had changed too. The careful distance following their argument about Isabel had gradually disappeared, replaced by a closeness neither had anticipated when they spoke their hasty vows. Last night, his lips had found hers in the firelight, a question asked and answered, without words. A rider in royal livery appeared at the end of the garden path, breaking her reverie. The messenger bowed low. "Lady Blackthorn, His Majesty King Richard sends greetings." She accepted the sealed parchment with steady hands that betrayed nothing of her racing heart. The royal seal cracked beneath her thumb, revealing elegant script. "What news?" Gareth asked, appearing beside her, as if conjured by her thoughts. "The king has read portions of our chronicle," she said, scanning the letter. "He wishes to appoint me royal archivist, to establish a permanent record of his reign." Gareth's expression remained carefully neutral. A prestigious position. Few women have held such royal favor. "The appointment begins immediately. I'm summoned to London within the fortnight." Elaine refolded the parchment, studying her husband's face. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime. Then you must accept." His voice betrayed nothing of what might lie beneath the words. That evening, Elaine sat alone in the private study they had shared through winter. Her scribing tools were packed, ready for the journey to London. Only one task remained: completing. The final pages of the Jerusalem Chronicle, she dipped her quill and began to write, but not the ending Gareth expected. Instead, she wrote of a starving scribe and a knight who carried her through winter, of two people wounded by past losses who found unexpected healing in each other, of convenience that transformed to necessity, then to choice. The door opened, quietly. Gareth entered carrying a wooden box she recognized immediately. "Isabel's belongings," he said, placing it before her. "I thought you should decide their fate." Elaine touched the box gently. "They should be returned to her family. Her memory deserves its proper place, not as a shadow between us." Gareth's gaze fell to the manuscript. "That's not the Jerusalem account." "No." She turned the parchment toward him. "This is our chronicle, the true one." He read in silence, his expression changing as he absorbed her words. When he looked up, something had shifted in his eyes. "The king's appointment would restore everything you lost," he said quietly. "Status, security, purpose. I have purpose here." Elaine rose, moving to stand before him. "I have everything I need." "And what of the royal archivist position?" She smiled, taking his scarred hands in hers. "I've written to suggest a joint appointment. The king can have two chroniclers, one for court matters, one for military campaigns. Together we tell a complete story." Understanding dawned in his face. "Together. If you'll have me," she whispered. "Not from necessity or arrangement, but from choice." His answer came not in words, but in the way he drew her close, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as two halves of a story finding its proper ending. Outside, spring sunlight gilded new leaves, while inside, something equally precious continued its bloom, fragile, hard-won, and finally free of winter's grip. In Elaine's pocket, William's ring no longer weighed like an anchor, and in the wooden box that would soon leave Thornfield, Isabel's broken quill had served its final purpose, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a testimony to what endured, to love that survived the harshest seasons, to write its own unexpected story.